Hi, my name is Dr. Matt Harris, and I am the CEO and co-founder of ChildSafeguarding.com.
My name is Kanan Chittiar. I am the CEO and co-founder of Avvanz.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have a discussion around risk mitigation and safer recruitment related to human resources in schools worldwide. So, Kanan, in the times that we've talked before, you have a real strong opinion and a commitment to safer recruitment in schools, specifically around the realm of safeguarding and child protection. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, safeguarding and child protection is obviously a very big framework, but I focus on safer recruitment, and of which background checks is the actual zone that we really focus on. Why is this important? I think we all know, we have read many cases of wrongful hires, and that posing a lot of risk to the school, not only to the safety of the children, but also to the reputation of these schools. And we have enough data points to show that out of every 10 profiles, about 2 to 3 profiles pose some form of discrepancies, inflated credentials, or even derogatory background, which is why the policy on safer recruitment has to be very tight.
Yeah, see that's really amazing because we have had similar experiences where your discussions and your work is more of the external personalities and experiences of the staff. We work specifically around child protection of the staff internal to the school. You're doing background checks for people's histories and even kind of their current conditions outside of the school environment. That's a great safeguard to ensure that we know exactly what the people are like when they come into the school. We have the feeling that training is an important part. So what we focus on is doing child protection training for every single adult within the community, be they parents or staff members or volunteers or teachers, whomever. Not only do we need to know that they're safe to be around the children from their history, but we want them to be very clear around what appropriate actions are at the school, both in their observations of others, but then in their personal behavior.
Yeah, and that's very good, right? Because training is obviously an important aspect for people to understand how to behave and, or rather, what to do and what not to do, especially young children. But the other thing is also, I mean, training obviously comes in after the individual joins the school, right? And the awareness is very, very important. But before getting them on board, even that's where the background checking starts, right? For example, you could check somebody's background in terms of criminal checks or whether the education is real. Do they really have the teaching qualification? Do they have any sort of even sex offenses in the previous background? And even like social media checks, right? You unveil a lot of data points. So that's the first stage, right? So once you've done that, then once they come on board, then you will have to make sure through your training. Obviously, that's very important. So it sort of sits in very well. So it's a good complementing two things that we've got to do in the school, because I think again, like what I said earlier, there's a lot of cases of violation of children, right? I think now almost every month there's a few different cases, different parts of the world, and I think like you, we also support more than 600 schools around the world. And we've seen enough data points. I think background checking is very important, and training is also super important. Right?
You know, it's interesting too, because you talk about those things, and I think when people hear training or background checks, they think, oh, great, let's get that done before they first show up to work. But what's powerful in the approaches that you're taking and with the schools that we're using is that the training does happen in advance and the background checks happen in advance, but then it's a continual process.
Yeah.
So we hear safer recruitment, and I know that schools do this quite a bit where they do these safer recruitment exercises prior to entry, but it's that continuous, regular coming back. So maintaining their background checks with your services, even after they've been hired on, all the way till the end of their employment or involvement. And then with us, making sure that that training is done on a regular basis to keep people current and documented and ensuring that they know their responsibilities at the school and the expectation of the school that they will speak out if they have an issue or they see a problem. It's only when everybody is kind of looking at everybody else. It's like a CCTV model. Our CCTVs are looking external to the school. Yeah. Our CCTVs are looking internal to the school. And those only work if they're turned on all the time. It's not just when you first opened up the building in the morning, right?
Yeah. And there's two things here, right? Like what you said, external, internal. We're not only talking about staff, and I think you mentioned very quickly parents and all that. So vendors, contractors, could be bus drivers, food caterers, a soccer teacher, whoever's coming in. I think if they're not vetted properly and they're not trained properly, obviously they're going to pose some form of risk. And the other thing you mentioned quickly, Matt, is the continual process, right? So I know training, background checking are probably done at the beginning, but it's got to be continuous. So a lot of schools just like how they would like a reminder training or refresher training to make sure they're updated and reminded how what they should adhere to. I think there's a background checking also. It's done like every 12 months. A lot of the schools have started doing some of the critical checks again on them. Like education check, you've already done it once, great. But then criminal check, because while being employed, you could still be posing a risk to the school, right? Which is what the continuous checking and the training have to go hand in hand, right?
It's interesting too, along with that when it comes to background checks and when it comes to training, there's kind of two levels to it. It's not only the beginning and the continuity, it's the universal expectations and then the local expectations. So I know when you and I have talked about your background checks, you are doing universal checks in social media and then doing local related checks as well.
Yeah.
We do the same thing with the trainings. So the trainings that we offer are universal. So they're multilingual, they hit international standards, and they're available at any time. So you don't just do them in August or in January when teachers first come to school. You have them available at any time. But it's important to contextualize both of these things. So with our training, what we recommend is that the training is done on a regular basis, but then that contextualization of what's the reality of being at the school, or what's the reality of working as a bus driver in community X. Those are important. And the same with the background checks for you, right? Is that you have to make sure that there's a local connection to the information you have about everybody, so that it's both universal on the standards that we know about, but then localized to the needs of the school. And so maybe it's good for us to talk about those international standards. So what are the international standards of the international organizations that you guys connect to when you're doing your background checks?
Yeah, of course, there are a lot of accrediting councils across the globe which have their own policies and recommendations for the safeguarding and child protection framework or policy, right? But then we like to align with the International Task Force for Child Protection, ITFCP, which have a huge set of guidelines on what are the best practices for schools. And a lot of schools have started looking at it, learning from it. So again, I think beyond what both of us do in terms of training and background checking, there's also a policy that you need to write. Again, that's something that we obviously help some of the schools through our network of consultants, right? On top of what ITFCP recommends, obviously, like what exactly you said, they're in-country or different regulation related requirements as well. Because certain checks in some countries you can do, cannot do. So what else can you do, right? So they have the basic guidelines, and then we have come up with a set of best practices based on our experiences with the 600 plus schools. And on top of it, again, the schools might have their own policy or might have their own needs, and based on that, you build up a different suite of checks. And exactly same as how you contextualize your training, not just by school. I'm sure you look at the different jurisdictions as well, right? The regulatory frameworks as well. Yeah.
That's absolutely right. And we do a lot of work as well, making sure that we align to the essential questions from the International Task Force for Child Protection, which I think is a great resource for people to go take a look at.
Yeah.
Further, we align all of our training to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And if you really look at kind of the history and the usage of the UNCRC, virtually every legal framework worldwide, every accreditation requirement, every standard is tied to several articles within the UNCRC. So as you're looking at the training or looking at the things that we're offering, or even using it as a benchmark for the background checks that you're doing, by having that universal standard across the world kind of tied to the UNCRC, you're ensuring that there's a consistency, whether somebody has moved from country to country or is moving from school to school or bus company to bus company within the same context. You have the same standards of requirements for them to.
Yeah.
I think it's with that,
yeah,
tied to the contextualization and the regularity of the training and the background checks, that you provide the best situation at a school to ensure that people's backgrounds and they know how to act appropriately around the children, which kind of takes that idea of safer recruitment and embeds it within the HR practices at the school.
Yeah. And that's exactly how you mitigate risk, right? Through safeguarding child protection. And if you think about it, this is the basic. But I've talked to a lot of schools who have not even started on these, right? Some would actually wait for something to happen, which is too late, right? I mean, forget about that. We can't forget the reputation, but I think more important than that is you have violated a child, and that's going to stay on forever, right? I think training and background checking are really the essentials. Policies and essential, and that's how you build up on it, right? Of course, some schools, I'm not sure whether you see this in the training, some schools would say, oh, I would like to do the background checking only on the high-risk people first, the one who have direct contact with children. And then they'll go on to the indirectly involved, like your service providers and all that. But again, I think we have seen examples of cases whereby non-academic staff or people who are not directly in contact with children have violated children. So unfortunately, that's the ugly truth, which means the moment any individual gets into the campus of the school should be vetted and trained, right? So do you see in your experience, schools whereby they're not even doing these and they're not aware of what to do, and they rather wait for something to happen?
I think there's a variety. I think every school is different in terms of their approaches to child protection and this risk mitigation, because for a number of factors, right? The experiences, the management, the finances, the context, the country, the community, the culture. I mean, we could go on forever. But there is that universal piece, and I think you've kind of alluded to it, and you've even flat out said it, and that is that everybody has a role to play here. Everybody needs to be vetted. Everybody needs to be trained.
Yeah.
If they are an adult within the school community, whether it is temporarily or a visitor or a parent or whomever it is, they need to go through these processes. It's the only way to ensure the best possible outcomes for the students and to make things safe. And so that's actually kind of the tagline for us, and that is that everyone has a role to play when it comes to child protection.
Yeah.
So as schools approach this, I really don't subscribe to or really like the idea of kind of a ranked choice set of background checks and trainings. No, it has to be everybody. Everybody has to do it, kind of full stop. There is no first, second, or third here.
I mean, I take it as it's all or none. do it proper, otherwise don't do it. But then not doing it, obviously we have discussed the consequences of that. So hopefully, I think this little discussion that we will share with our network will benefit from, and of course they can always approach us for more information, and we can guide them on how to go about doing this, right?
Thank you very much for this. If anybody would like more information, please visit childsafeguarding.com or avvanz.com, and we'd be happy to share more about our service offerings, our expertise, and maybe even show you a few exemplary schools that are doing it very well.
Yeah, we can show you some case studies as well. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.